let's say, a drift down analysis or event where you lost both engines. So now you're trying to figure out how far, how long can you stay aloft, how long can you glide to the nearest suitable airport in your equipment. Well, that's something you can simulate, or just losing one engine. How long can you fly on that single engine, and then going through certain procedures as far as cross-feeding, because you only be able to get fuel out of one engine to go into the remaining engine that's on. You don't want to be out of balance before landing, or exhaust all that fuel out and have a lot of fuel in the other wing. So things like that, you can simulate that procedure so that when you actually do that in real life, even at the schoolhouse in training, because you already have a level of experience, therefore confidence that you would do the procedure correctly because you already rehearsed it, done it many times at home.
Okay. Hi, my name is Joshua with Pimax VR, and today I am sitting down with Captain Marlon from American Airlines.
Hello.
So, Marlon, if you wouldn't mind, would you take a couple of moments to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, I'm Marlon Choyce. I'm a captain, like Joshua said, for American Airlines on the Airbus 320 family, which includes the 319, 320, and 321. Based in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. I've been with the company for 6 years now, and it's been pretty good. No complaints.
6 years with the company, and how many years in total have you been operating as a pilot?
Yeah, so as an airline pilot, I've been operating since 2011, May 2011. So we're looking at just over 12 years. And as a pilot in general, I've been flying since 2006, so it's been about 17 years from start to current. Yeah.
All right, so that's a long career. Now, how long do you usually have, in this career as a pilot? How long are people allowed to fly? Are there limits for that?
Yes, the current limit right now is 65 years old. So whichever happens first, meaning if you lose your medical or you do something you're not supposed to be doing, as far as getting fired, or if you get sick, that goes towards your medical there. But right now, it's 65 years old. In the future, it may be 67. There's benefits and drawbacks to that change. But so most people try to retire close to there, because the more years you have at your airline, the more money you can make and put away into your retirement plan.
So you're 6 years in, and you're currently certified on the Airbus 320 family, right?
Yes.
So 319, 320, and
321.
321. So what does that mean in terms of, I suppose, your current ranking as a captain at American Airlines?
Well, what that means is that we at American Airlines, we have 4 aircrafts. We have the 737, which is by Boeing, the Airbus 320 family, the Boeing 777, and the Boeing 787. So most pilots try to get on an equipment, which is one of those airplanes, based on the quality of life and pay. We don't have every airplane at every base. So if you're living somewhere, but you want to be based somewhere else, but you want to be on a particular airplane, you want to make sure that base has that. So, but going back to being a captain, you can, most people, when airlines hire pilots, they want to hire captains to come up, but your entry level is first officer, which is a co-pilot. And because it's all about the quality of life, you have many pilots who stay as a first officer and not choose to become a captain, even though they're eligible and they make fine captains, but they just prefer their seniority at that first officer level. As for me, I enjoy my seniority on the captain level. I recently moved from one state to another state, from one base to a different base, so I could have a better quality of life overall on the business side as far as working for the company, but also on a personal side for my family and my friends.
Okay, really. So it sounds like you've really got a nice setup there, and you've been enjoying your time with the company. You've just made some moves for quality of life changes. I think that a lot of the people who would be watching this, they're pretty familiar with virtual reality technology in general. A lot of them are familiar with what we at Pimax do as a company in terms of headset development and pushing with the tech. But I think that a blind spot for a whole lot of people is really what simulation's place is in all of this. Like, I don't know how to fly a plane. I know very little about flight simulators. I've been out to a few flight sim expos. I've spoken with many of our users who are heavy users of flight simulators, but I personally, am not very well acquainted in it. I jump into a sim, and the very first thing that I do is usually nosedive straight into the Earth's crust. So you tell us a little bit about simming. I mean, just kind of like a little overview, like why do you jump into a flight sim when you're not at work flying for real?
Right, so there's two aspects of jumping into a flight sim while I'm at home. The first part is to have fun. So there's different games you could play and use your flight simulator to have a better experience in playing those games. The second reason is because I do fly for a living, and there are certain programs out there that simulates me flying the same equipment that I fly in real life, where I could use that as a training tool to stay fresh, to stay sharp on my skills and my different procedures and different things you have to encounter in the real world. I could simulate that, in a controlled environment using the flight simulator at home. So you got to keep in mind that pretty much every airline either has assets or they have their own simulators to train pilots, whether it's new hires, transition training, upgrade training, recurrent training. Every year, we go back to the schoolhouse, and things that have changed over the last year or different policies and procedures have been implemented over the year, we get a refresher course each year so we can stay sharp and maintain that level of safety and professionalism that the public demands of us. So airline spends tens of millions of dollars on these simulators, and they are operated around the clock 20 hours out of the 24-hour day. The other 4 hours, typically from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., routine maintenance being scheduled in the simulators. But other than that, they're in use, for 20 hours out of the day. So it's very crucial. It's a pertinent element when it comes to learning how to fly and how to fly the airplane the company way.
So I've seen some of the simulator rigs that people use, especially at the Flight Simulation Expo. These are massive machines. Even on the smaller end of the scale, I mean, you're talking about hydraulic-powered computer screens and control panels that must weigh at minimum a ton. I mean, the smaller ones are the size of a small sedan, and the larger ones that I saw were like nearly the size of an RV. I mean, they are huge, honking monstrosities of metal. And I imagine that if you're talking about American Airlines, they probably have the best of the best, whenever it comes to simulators like these. Whenever you're talking about a simulation in VR, though, you're talking about something a lot smaller. I mean, you've got a headset that is smaller than most flight helmets. A pilot might have, a jet fighter's helmet is larger and heavier than this is. You've got a few control sticks and panels according to what a user might want to lay out, and those aren't even necessary. It's possible to just use the controllers and use hand tracking and actually press the buttons, interact with everything in the cockpit virtually. And then you've got, a PC, and we don't have one here for demonstration, but, I think everyone's familiar with what a home gaming PC looks like. So there's just a huge difference in scale. What's the difference between them, like in actual use, though?
Well, the more elements you have involved, whether it's particularly we're talking about hardware. So the more hardware components that you could put together to simulate whatever experience you're trying to recreate, whether it's flying, whether it's racing, or whatever it is, the more immersed that experience will be. So the simulators back at what these airlines have at their flight schools, they are pretty much a 100% mock-up of the actual airplane. You wouldn't even know the difference. If I showed you a photo inside of the simulator, you'd think that it's a photo of the actual airplane, but it's not. So the closer when you're at home, or you have access to a small flight simulator somewhere at your friend's house, or somewhere in the community at a recreational center, something like that, or a flight center, the more items you have, the more immersed. So like, for example, I'll give you a couple years ago, before I had my full motion flight simulator at the house, I just had the dual throttles, flight stick, HOTAS, rudders at the desk on a 2D monitor. And actually I had the VR headset at the time, just not the full motion. I just finished a recurrent training session, which is a 5-day training, 3 days in the sim, 2 days classwork. And just in the regular, we call it desk chair, gaming chair. Well, I came back home, loaded up, I can't remember which one it was, Flight Simulator 2020 or DCS World. And I found myself, when I got into the airplane, reaching for something. I'm reaching for the seat belts. I'm like, what am I doing? Well, I don't have any seat belts. I'm in an office chair. Well, that's the immersion you have when you have good visuals that you're looking around and it looks like the actual cockpit, but it's not the actual cockpit. I don't have seat belts. Well, why did I do that? Oh, because I just finished a few days ago my recurrence, and we're in an actual FAA approved flight simulator where it's an exact replica of the equipment that you're on, where it has seat belts we have to wear because it's motion. So that speaks volumes on how well, if you have the right tools in place, the right components together, it could really give you an amazing experience to whatever application that you're planning on using for yourself, whether it's for entertainment or for a profession.
Okay, yeah, I definitely believe that. I did get a short little introductory course over at FSC. I got to hop into one simulator. They had a flight instructor there who guided me through just the initial takeoff and an attempted landing of like a Cessna, I think.
Yes.
All right, just small plane, and that was it's crazy. You start getting the rumbling of the engines. You get the shaking as you take off. The entire machine banks and turns with you. It really does suck you into what you're doing. And when things start going wrong, you really you start to panic because you're out of control, and you see, through the monitors, that ground coming up at you. And even though whenever you go into the simulator that you're entering what's basically a game, I think that it's so different from any video game that I've ever played.
A good example where the matchmaking of great hardware and software. So we got the Pimax headset software, we'll say Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and the same airplane I fly as far as Airbus 320neo, or just 320, 319, 321. But when you start off as a pilot, let's say you're a new hire, you just got hired at your dream job at this airline, and they're going to teach you how to fly this airplane. You'll get a type rating because you don't have one. More so, if you already have one, you still got to learn how to fly the airplane their way, the operator way, because different operators, different airlines fly the same airplanes differently. So with that being said, it's typical that for you to start to, as a pilot, to know the airplane, the most elementary way we do this is we just sit in a chair It's called chair fly. So you sit in a chair and you pretty much use your imagination and you simulate what you're going to do in different phases of flight. That's what you do, you know. So if we're at the gate, you know, all right, we're passengers are boarding, and we got the final numbers as far as weight and balance and passenger count, our fuel load and everything. And then, okay, when we run the before start checklist, usually there's a trigger as far as a time, and then a flow. And you do your flow, and your flow is always like a sequence, you know, or, you know, whatever. And you do that. Well, to aid in that, the company also gives a new hire, we call this a paper tiger. So it's a cutout of the main instrument panel, the overhead panel, you know, the glare shield, the pedestal, so that you could post up on the wall in your hotel room and study, like while you're learning how to fly, either before you start your training or while you're in training during your times where you're not in the classroom. So you just, you know, pull up a chair and you get there and you face the wall and you go through your flows and stuff, or your different procedures, right? Well, this takes a step closer to reality when you integrate virtual reality, because you got to keep in mind some of these buttons and switches and knobs, and, you know, particularly the buttons. Well, you don't know if you press it, if that's an actual button where it's going to open a valve or close a valve or turn something on, turn something off. It can be just same shape as just an indicator light. So on the paper tiger, you don't know. You don't know until you actually get into the actual airplane or some simulation version of it, where we have this headset and the software that has that equipment on there. Well, you know right away before you even show up from day one that that's just an indicator light. No matter how many times you press it, nothing's going to happen, because something has to go on or off on the jet for that button to illuminate to say, hey, something's wrong or something needs to be checked out. That's not a push button. So that's just one of many gains that you could receive of using a VR headset as a tool to get ahead and stay ahead, whatever craft that you're in, whether it's like I said, the aviation industry, auto industry.
Whenever you're trying to create a situation that you can use for training, I would assume that you're creating situations for yourself that would be something of a challenge to deal with, something outside of the norm?
Yes, you could create that yourself, or usually the software that you are using. Let's say, for example, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, I believe they have different like emergency abnormal events to happen where that will require you to run a procedure in order to mitigate or to resolve that issue, as far as hydraulic leak or air leak or engine failure or anything, you know, rapid decompression or something like that. So you could, like I said, you could use those that's already built into the software, or you create your own. You know, you just fly enough and, you know, and you just induce the fuel starvation. You know?
I'm going to turn off one of the engines now, and
right.
then I'm going to deal with it. And you're going to intentionally replicate a situation
that you wouldn't do in an actual airplane, but that you may still experience if you're unlucky in an actual airplane.
Okay.
So that's pretty good. For example, let's say a drift down analysis or event where you lost both engines. So now you're trying to figure out how far and how long can you stay aloft. You know, how long can you glide to the nearest suitable airport in your equipment? Well, that's something you can simulate, or just losing one engine. You know, how long can you fly on that single engine, and then going through certain procedures as far as cross feeding, because you only be able to get fuel out of one engine to go into the remaining engine that's on. You don't want to be out of balance before landing, or exhaust all that fuel out and have a lot of fuel in the other wing. So things like that, you can simulate that procedure so that when you actually do that in real life, even at the schoolhouse in training, because you already have a measure, a level of experience, therefore confidence that you would do the procedure correctly because you already rehearsed it, done it many times at home.
Okay. It sounds like a lot of fun, actually, if I'm being perfectly honest. So, you create these situations, you learn to deal with them, and you push through them. And ultimately, that kind of makes you a more competent and more experienced pilot. Because, I suppose if you've never done the simulations, you have a major catastrophic failure of one of the engines, I don't know, a flock of birds or something goes through the thing, then, having to deal with that for the very first time with no experience would probably be pretty difficult. It'd probably...
Yeah, I mean, that goes for any profession. If you're a firefighter, police officer, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is, it's you're going to revert back to your training. When the abnormal situation arise, you're not going to rise to the level of occasion. You're not going to be a superhero. You're not going to go above and beyond that you ever did. No, you're going to revert back to the level of training that you performed, what was instilled to you. So the more you have that, whether it's from something whether it's from the company that provides the training or from self-study, it's all valuable. It's all valuable. There's been many stories, I'm sure you all are already aware of kids, young adults going to these different conventions, and they sit in a really full mock-up simulator that the vendor exhibitor has provided for the public, and they end up landing that Boeing 777 or 737 or the Airbus 321 without even having not 1 ounce of certified training. Well, how is that? Oh, because we have X-Plane at home, or we have Microsoft Flight Simulator at home, and oh yeah, he's on it. Yeah, Jamie's on it all the time. That's why, because they practice this a lot, and it is valuable. It is.
So you said earlier that the FFA certified simulators they have at the actual airlines. Are there any FAA certified simulators you can use at home? Is there anything you can use that's a certified product that you can use for, say, getting a basic pilot's license?
Yes, they are, and they're more. They're called FTDs, which were. The name escaped me for a moment. I know the TD stands for a train device. The F stands for maybe flights. Not sure, but those are. Expensive, but least expensive than a full motion, commercial grade, have been approved by the FAA. So you find those most likely at smaller flight schools where you're trying to learn how to fly, like you mentioned, that Cessna 172. At those schools, they would have those type of flight train devices. That's what it's called, a flight train device, at their school, because even though they're economical, they cost less, but they still provide a great value because you learn the basics in that device, which is cheaper for the consumer, for the applicant, or for the pilot or student pilot, than if they were to do the same thing, that same flight lesson or ground lesson in the actual aircraft. So it is something that someone could probably buy at home, but it's probably not as practical, because you probably better get the same, if not better, experience if you just go to a flight center, because it would be too costly.
Too costly to influence yourself.
Yeah.
What about for VR? Is there anything that people can make use of at home? Maybe if they're looking into learning to fly themselves.
Well, yeah. So VR is a different story because, like I said, the both aspects of it: professionalism as a tool or entertainment as a toy, that you can use. So it has more value, all around value. You can invite people over, family, friends, neighbors over, and each one could explore a different avenue using VR headset, versus if you just had a flight train device that's in a Piper Seminole, a small twin-engine airplane. That's all they're going to be doing is flying that twin-engine airplane. Even though it's pretty neat, looking at the gauges, you're flying simulated instrument, flying, where there may not even be a display, or you turn the display off because you're just trying to learn and fly by the instruments. Whereas the VR, it has like a breadth of uses out of it. So I kind of highly recommend that, because with that you could tailor it to your customary needs. You know, if you, like I mentioned earlier about auto racing, there's a growing, yeah, auto racing flight training, or just uses of flight. People are using VR, and they tailoring it based on either the equipment they're flying or the equipment they want to fly. So I know some people want to go into the military soon. They want to fly a particular aircraft, the F-16 or the F-18. Well, that's, again, you get the right hardware and software together, and you're able to set yourself up for success much earlier, much easier than, without it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
You go into your flight training, I already at least know where all the buttons are.
Right. And not just that, but like landing, that's crucial. I mean, that's another story in and of itself. When I was a new hire at American Airlines, and I got hired on the Airbus 320, so I've been on the same airplane ever since. As a first officer, as a co-pilot, I was flying with a captain who was a first officer on the wide-body Airbus 330. And he's been a captain for the 320 years ago, but he's about to retire in a few years. He wanted to come back to the left seat and be a captain on a narrow body on the 320 for the next 2 or 3 years before he retire. So anyways, long story short, really good guy. We're helping each other out, studying, helping each other, going to dinner and stuff, and talking about what we're going to do the next day and everything. So, but he had an issue with landing, which is common, because remember, he's coming from a wide body, so his flight deck sits much higher than the flight deck of a narrow body, sits a little bit lower. So long story short, he kept flaring, he kept wanting to arrest the descent and transition to a landing attitude much earlier, much higher than what is required in a smaller airplane, a narrow body aircraft. Okay. So, and of course, I was just nailing the landings so much so that the instructor was like, have you flown this airplane before? Do you have a type rating? Did you come from these other airlines? They mentioned like Frontier or Spirit, because they have Airbuses in their fleet, or only Airbuses in their fleet. I said, no, I came from a regional airlines, where a smaller airplane. So anyways, it wasn't until after a break, on the weekends we go home, we come back, and he's like, Marlon, I've been meaning to ask you, because I had my grandkids over this past weekend, and we were playing video games. I meant to ask you, do you play video games? I was like, yes, I do. He's like, that's why. I was like, yeah, that's why. I said, a lot of things are transferable. A lot of things are transferable over as far as second nature. Actually, there's been a study that's been performed almost like 15, 18 years ago, where, yes, gamers have excellent eye-hand coordination, but they also, the same study, took the average person that didn't play games a lot. When we say games, meaning PC games or console games, not games on your phone or tablets. They took the same control group, or same experimental group that didn't play games, and realized that after a 2-3 week period, their eye-hand coordination got close to those who were hardcore gamers. So it doesn't take much to learn the mechanics of what games and what VR, and applying that to a real situation. It doesn't take much to get there, to close that gap.
I think it's that spatial memory is probably a part of that. Is your hands begin to memorize the layouts of controllers, where everything is. You never have to look at a controller, typically even a keyboard, once you've gotten used to it. Mm-hmm. Once you know where your controls are, after a short period of time, a couple hundred button presses, which happens over the course of a few hours of playing, your hands have fully memorized the layout of the panels of the controller that you're using, right? So you've got that mental ability to associate the location of something with a function, right? So it's spatial and muscle memory, as well as a cognitive level of memory. It's helping you to perform these tasks almost subconsciously. I don't have to think whenever I want to do a dodge roll, right, in Elden Ring before I do it. I just hit the button that I've assigned for it. And even after changing buttons assignment, switching to a different type of controller, it takes a couple of minutes and then I'm fully acquainted with the new control scheme as well. And I think that level of hand-eye coordination, it definitely seems like something that would transfer over. It's not so much the actual game playing skill. I mean, those are a different type of skill, but it's actually the association of location with functionality.
Yep.
Right?
I agree. And as far as a direct application when it comes to flying an airplane, it's like during a rejected takeoff sequence or boarding a takeoff. And of course, we fly in all types of weather. We fly if it's raining, if it's snowing, or things like that. Sunny days, wet days, day and night. So you don't have time if you something going on the takeoff roll where you have to requires a rejected takeoff. You have to reach for the throttles and open up the buckets and the thrust levers, the thrust reversers deploy, returning the throttles to idle. We got to do that instinctively without looking. You can't be like, no, because you're still trying to maintain center line, and at the same time bring the airplane to a stop before you run out of runway. So, and all that could be fine-tuned when you're not flying and you're not at the schoolhouse going through a training session or training cycle. You could be doing it at home, especially if you're on vacation. A lot of pilots, we get a lot of vacation, or we get a lot of days off, depending on your seniority. And there may be 3 weeks that you haven't flown an airplane, or 4 weeks that you have not flown an airplane. You feel like you're a little rusty in certain phases of flight, not everything, but just certain things you don't do a whole lot. Well, this is opportunity, a means to stay fresh or get there if you're not there.
So one thing I think a lot of people probably who are watching this might want to know too. We know there are the flight simulators out there, and there's probably a fair bit of information out there on the internet about how to get up in various plane models, how to operate them. Is there a simulator for a big book of pilot slang that any of us can download? Because, whenever you're describing all of these maneuvers and all these procedures that you go through, there's so many different types of slang and jargon that you use that obviously you've built up over years and years in the industry and years in the hobby. So I think that for a lot of people, even when it comes to trying to figure out what a procedure is, you may first need to know what that procedure is called in order to find good and clear information on how to do so. So how can people jump into the jargon? Because for me, I think that jargon is one of the biggest barriers to entry for any industry.
Right. So the easiest way I think of is to watch others do it. So whether if you're watching a video of those individuals having a discussion or communicating, a flight crew, or if it's whether it's civilian or military, or whether it's a game, or you being a gamer and playing a game. I tell you, I have no experience in the military. But you would not think that based on how much things I know. Well, I only know because I play a lot of military style games over the last 15, 20 years. It's almost like when I was younger playing Madden, I learned a lot about football before I became a football player in high school. I learned a lot about football as far as, the N's and O's and hitting, the things that you don't see a lot watching a game on television, but playing a game and running plays or designing plays and the design editor, you learn that gaming. And gaming is very helpful because most people learn better when they're in a positive, entertaining environment. Things not only come to them better, but it sticks with them better. And so I kind of recommend that, because I could just tell you, well, You just read. But they're like, well, I'm asleep now. That's what I don't do. I read a lot. Read a lot.
Yeah, work out those imagination.
Right. Dream on. You be dreaming, right? So I'm trying to be effective. So yes, so you find what makes you tick. If you know you're a visual person, then yes, I recommend watching the right videos as far as people talking, that type of phraseology and that type of language, or if not, finding a game that has that type of functionality to it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm actually becoming quite interested in the concept. We've kind of tossed around the idea of me getting with a captain over some video streams and teaching me how to fly. See if I can't go out and actually get a pilot certification using our headset as the main facilitator of that. So doing that entirely with just the PC hardware at home. No HOTAS, no control stick. We're just going to stick with the hand tracking and or the motion controllers and see how far we can get with it. Is it possible to use VR entirely, at least up till you get into your first training flights with an actual plane? But how far can you get with a simulation?
Yeah, it's amazing what we got going on today. I remember years ago, certain simulator software did not fully replicate certain things. Not that it had to, but because it didn't, where it lacked, it would break the immersion. So for example, let's say I'm flying to the same airport that I'm receiving my flight training from on the private pilot level. So I'm a student pilot, and it's a municipal airport. And I go there and I go for my instructor, but go for a flight lesson, an hour and a half, doing maneuvers, steep turns, slow flight, stalls, power off stalls, power on stalls, emergency procedures, whatever it is, ground reference point maneuvers, we do that. And then I go back home and I'm trying to, identify my common student errors that I made. And I'm trying to, do another debrief myself, and then I go up on my simulator, or plug in my simulator, load it up, and try to duplicate what I just did with my instructor. And I'm at this airport. Well, this airport I'm at, the layout was all wrong. The airport diagram, the taxiways, the runways, it doesn't match nothing. So it kind of breaks the immersion. But today, it's not like that. It's almost, it uses these maps, whereas Google or Bing or a combination of both, or probably other maps, but they're pretty darn accurate, right? Pretty accurate, So, and that helps out a lot when it comes to when you're trying to become a pilot, because you're starting off as a VFR pilot, which is visual flight rules, which means that you get to see stuff. You got to see visual landmarks. I see the river, I see the town square, I see them, these different landmarks that you use for navigation to get from point A to point B. So this headset is amazing because it's so clear, and you can see those things from a distance, equivalent to the distance that you see in an actual airplane looking at those things. So it's pretty good. And you get back to the real airplane, and you're like, oh, have I been here before? Like, no, this is your first time going here. We used to go south of this freeway, and now we're north of this freeway. You've never been over here at this altitude before. No, I'm quite certain I have over here. And then, well, how do you know all that stuff? Oh, I have a flight simulator at home that kind of simulates what we're experiencing right now in the real world.
Microsoft Flight Sim also does real-time weather simulation, doesn't it?
Not just real-time weather, but real-time traffic. What that means is, if I'm flying an actual airplane, I'm on American Flight 127. It's a 777-200 flying from Dallas-Fort Worth to Shanghai. And right now we're over just off the coast of Washington State, heading westbound here at 34,000 feet. And somebody else is on Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they just took off from Seattle in their Bonanza, and they're flying west over the water. And they have a system on their airplane called TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, and they turn it above so they can start looking up different aircraft with transponders above them. Well, they could see that it would say AA 127, 34,000 feet. Real traffic.
So if they fly up there, they'll see a plane actually.
Yeah, it's a simulation of an actual plane that's there in real time. And like you mentioned about real weather. So if it's cloudy, if it's overcast, if it's clear skies, all of that. If it's raining in that area, it'd be raining.
Wow.
Temperature,
So that has, it's some really amazing software.
Yeah, it's a world inside of a world. There's actual pilots or wannabe pilots or future pilots. There are actual air traffic controllers or wannabe air traffic controllers or future air traffic controllers that are engaged every second of the day, like right now, that's flying in this virtual world, giving instruction, giving taxi clearances to pilots, giving takeoff clearances, landing clearances to pilots, so that they can stay sharp in what they're going to do, or they're trying to do what they can to prepare themselves for this new opportunity to be an air traffic controller or to be a pilot. So it's so many ways you could do this, and they're using the best simulation, which is right now the virtual reality headset. Right now, it's because the prices have come way down, respectively, over the last few years when it comes to what you're getting out of it. So it's like the quality and the prices, and they start to meet in the middle. So it's a good time to get into it.
So moving forward, we can focus on here at Pimax to deepen our connection with people in the simulation space. I see the development of VR, I think probably differently from a lot of people out there. I look at VR as a tool. It's an incredible training tool. It's a tool for connecting people. But one of my primary uses is my son currently lives in the United States while I'm right here in Shanghai, China right now. During this period of time, while I'm separated from him, I can't maintain that physical connection that I have with him whenever I'm home. So for me, being able to jump into a private room on VR chat or something, to jump into Rec Room or some other VR software that has that multiplayer functionality, and to have at least the simulation of being present there in the same room with him is just something that no other technology can provide. A video call is not the same, a phone call is not the same, a text message or an email or something is just not at all the same. But being able to do that in VR is, as close to the real presence as I can get. And then to see other people who are taking it a step further and bringing their work lives and their pursuits for education, their pursuits for furthering their skill development into VR too. For me, it's just really the development of a tool that can not necessarily replace anything that you do in real life, but can further heighten the possibilities that you have available to you. They can open up new avenues to success that we haven't seen before with other types of technology. And coming to that realization as we start to and continue to grow in this industry, it really makes me wonder what we can do to better serve people like you and your use of this technology.
Yeah, well, I think you guys are pretty much doing that for the most part as far as offering these road shows, because the thing is, the potential consumer, they don't know, and not only they don't know about where VR is today, they may not even know how they could benefit from that in their everyday life, okay? Unless you present them an opportunity to discover what you have to offer. And it's something that kind of that movie, The Matrix, it's something that that individual has to see for themselves. We could talk about it, all day long, and it won't be as effective unless you get the opportunity to get a hands-on experience and check it out, and then you could, light bulbs will be going off, I'm sure, like, I can see how it's practical in this or that, or my son or my daughter or my father, and things like that be going through your mind or yourself, how it could be useful along with what Pimax will recommend that you can use it for all these different things. Yeah, it's just getting your product out there more as much as you can, and making sure that it's because the thing is, right now you have many people who are looking at this video, so they already know that they have an interest or already have an interest in VR and probably already have a level of experience. They went over their cousin's house this past weekend and they went on, oh yeah, I know, Marlon, I know about VR, it's okay, but it wasn't a Pimax experience. It was a non-Pimax experience, and so up to that point, they may think that all VR experiences are the same, but they're not. They're not the same. There's different variables in play when it comes to not just different computer hardware components together and software components, but just how the user configures the settings. Kind of like when you buy a television, a monitor off the shelf at an electronics store. Well, you have the same TVs, set up on the shelves. You can have the exact same model of one or the other, but one looks different than the other, and they're the same model. Well, that's because one settings have the settings more color or lighter, darker, but it's a different experience, Now think about it. One TV is gone, the other TV is still there, and you're looking like, oh wow, I don't want that TV. It's dark, That's what I'm getting at as far as you can't just go by other people's experience of VR at times. You got to see it for yourself, and the more you learn about it, the more you expose yourself to it, the more I feel that you will find a good use of this product. So I encourage you to come out to these road shows.
We definitely have seen a lot of demands from people in various ways to improve their experiences. When it comes to flight simulation, in particular, it's very demanding for the PC. We're running really high resolutions here over a pretty good FOV. And once you start jacking up the settings in those simulators to get the real-time weather simulations, you're downloading 3D maps directly from the internet as you're playing. So in Microsoft Flight Simulator, for example, when you fly over New York City,
oh yeah, it's very demanding.
You actually see New York City as it looks in the most recent 3D scans of the city. The most recent was the topographical what do they call photogrammetry of New York. So you're seeing all of that. You can fly over your own house and see your own yard. And if you happen to have been standing in your yard at the time the last photos of your house were taken and were uploaded, then you can actually see yourself, standing out there, right there in your yard. And it's uploading all that in real time. It gets very demanding on the PC. So we see that a lot of people with our hardware, even with the top-end PC hardware, are struggling to even hit 45 frames per second, right? And that's what they've been doing is they target half of what our minimum refresh rate was. So recently we started developing a 72 hertz refresh rate mode for our Pimax Crystal. And that was to give people an even lower performance metric that they could target.
I understand what you're saying, because there are times where I could be playing a game and it has a high refresh rate and thus a high frames per second FPS counter, but it's still the microservers are there. Well, really, when you're simming, you really don't care about the FPS or the hertz. You just want smooth. That's what you care about. You just want smooth. And once it's smooth, you don't want to change nothing. You don't want to be like, well, it's smooth. Like we're flying an actual airplane and calm, still air. And you don't want to change nothing. The updates come in a week later on a certain software. You really don't want to change nothing. And you look at your FPS, and it's like, let's say it's like, I don't know, 64 frames per second. And of course, you're trying to increase that. You have an urge to increase that to like 90 because everybody's like, well, what are you doing at 62? You should be like 90 or 120 or whatever, you know? But you're trying to mimic the experience of a real time experience, hence the simulation. So long as it's smooth, that's what the eye cares about. I mean, you got to say, it can't be too low, obviously. You don't want to, if you're playing DCS World, you're shooting a missile, you don't want it to be, you know, or coming at you.
5 frames per second.
You know, or you're looking at the scan on your radar and just going like this because your refresh rate is so low or your FPS is so low. So, of course, we're looking at a desirable balance between the two.
So yeah, I think we're definitely doing our best to strike that and offer users what they want. I mean, eye tracking is a new feature we've put into the headsets that allows us to implement dynamic foveated rendering. So we can actually reduce resolution all across the FOV, except for where you're actually looking. So it tracks your eyes, and whichever part of the cockpit, part of the simulation or game you focus on is actually what gets rendered in full resolution, and allows us to drop resolution everywhere else. And in the best case scenarios, this can save you up to like 35-40% performance overhead on your GPU. And that's huge whenever you start getting into these simulators.
Huge. I agree. Very huge. Particularly like playing DCS World. So eye tracking is like phenomenal because it's the most desired element from a DCS user because you're in a cockpit that has a lot of instruments, a lot of things to read, a lot of, and they're different at different angles from where you're sitting position. So for example, you got the left console, you got the right console, you got the left front console, left rear. So let's talk about the rear. Well, if you didn't have eye tracking enabled, or you don't have eye tracking at all because you don't have a crystal, well, DCS users know when you're got your VR headset on and you're looking far behind you to the left, but there's only so much you can look if you're actually in a seat that's in the simulator, and to where you're not going to be able to read nothing because the piece that you're looking at through the eyepiece of the lens is not in the sweet spot of the lens. But with eye tracking, well, wherever you look, it's going to track your eye. So if your eye's looking at that switch that's labeled beacon on, well, you can see it clear as day. So that's a huge bonus in addition to what you were saying earlier, where it also yield greater performance because it's concentrating that resolution to where you're looking at and not where you're not looking at. So it's like the best of both worlds. It's like a win-win situation, which is unbelievable.
So offering the high resolution with the foveated rendering technology, and then for users who are doing things like motion rigs, oftentimes the cable might be a little bit of an annoyance. I know you've got a full motion setup at home, right?
Yes, and I have it tethered, so the cable does not get it my way at all. It's tethered on the ceiling, so I highly recommend that.
So we've got the, we recommend users do use a tether. It helps keep the cable up out of the way, and it's best not to let it drag along the floor. we don't want anybody tripping.
Right.
And usually I do that myself too, but I'm real lazy about it. I looked at my unit and I said, I need a tether for this. I need something to hang it up off of the ceiling. And I just decided, you know what? Extending key fobs. I just taped a couple of those to my ceiling.
There you go. That's what they are. There's reels. You can buy them off of Amazon or somewhere, and they come in a set. And you just
couple of D-rings, and you're good to go.
It's
cheap and easy. Not quite as nice as wireless, but we got the wide gig coming out for that, and can get you a nice, good image over that. Say, for instance, you really want to get that cable off. You really want to have that extra freedom of movement. And we definitely have that coming out for people. And then the low refresh rates and the dynamic foveated rendering with the high resolution panels, right, are just really necessary for this particular use case. Right, it all comes together to create a headset that has all the capabilities I think that people are really wanting out of a flight simulation headset. What do you think we should add next? What can we do after the crystal to really, drive it home and show that we we really have the best for simulation users at heart?
Provide a larger field of view.
Bigger FOV.
Right. That's because that's the you already have the clarity close to the human eye, but the field of view. Once you get that to match close to it, it's like I said, it's the closest thing of next to the human eye. So that's what you're trying to do. It's trying to get there. So when you can't get there, like you mentioned, you can't be in the same place with your son because for work-related reasons or other reasons. What's the next second biggest thing? So you go for that. And so the field of view is what a lot of, especially those who play combat type of games with it, is very vital. The less head movement, the less energy, you could gain more without fatigue, you could see more. I could see my knees, I could see the base of the instrument panel, I could see stuff without tilting my head. That's same thing. I don't have to tilt my head that much because I could use my peripherals. I could see a bandit that's turning cold, that I got to engage or I got to go on the defensive with, versus I don't see that bandit at all and I get an RWR alert, and I'm looking and it's too late, I'm already dead.
I think we might have something coming down the pipeline. I don't think people have really heard about it yet, but we've got something I think that'll target that line. Have you with us here at Pimax HQ. Hopefully you're able to stop through again. We're going to go out and take you for some good food, I think, for lunch.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Thank you.